In this next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to just talk about the king archetype, some bits about its positive virtues and capacities, some about the shadow. But by now you figured out that we're in the middle of a mystery, a kingship mystery, having to do with your own kingship. And I want to ask your permission, I seldom do this, but I want to ask your permission to read you a bit, just a page or so, from the preface to the first edition of this King Within book. This is the new 2007 edition that's got a lot elaboration of what we're dealing with this week. And the title of this, which I just want to begin with as a frame, so I would ask you to do this for me, to try to listen for the frame or the context of why we're talking about this kingship business. The return of the king and the blessing way, a human longing. Of all of humankind's primordial longings, probably the most widespread within all times and cultures is for the return of the true king. Many people think that messianic expectations are limited to fundamentalist Jews and Christians. But there is a hope common among many people for a ruler who will come to liberate us from oppression. Few of us are aware how prevalent the theme of a liberating king's return is in world mythology. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Return of the King and Frank Herbert's Dune are two popular contemporary works built around this theme. Niels Forsyth's book, The Old Enemy, demonstrates the theme's worldwide historical ubiquity. Striking parallels can be noted in accounts of the story from widely divergent cultures. Many stories begin by telling of monsters who reign over a chaotic world in the absence of the king, the wasteland. When the king arrives, he first defeats the monsters and then establishes a cosmos wherein justice and peace can flourish. This motif has the same mythic structure that we find underlying the messianic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and other religions. Many adherents of Islam look forward to the return of the Mahdi. Zoroastrians await for the return of Sayoshant. Buddhists expect the arrival of Maitreya. What are we to make of this persistent fantasy of our species? Do these fantasies simply reflect vestiges of the dependency needs we associate with regressive, even primitive, pre-modern religions? Many contemporary interpreters of psychology and myth would answer yes. But we have a different view. We believe these recurrent fantasies reflect a human intuition that our species is capable of far more caring and generativity than the Holocaust of recorded history would indicate. Encoded within our genetic inheritance, we believe, are what we call king and queen programs. If we can learn to access them adequately, they will enable men and women to cooperate in building a viable postmodern planetary civilization, a historical realization of mythic images of cosmos. The king we await is within, a psychological potential every man carries within him. In order to free us from the monsters of chaos, this liberator king will have to be embodied not by one individual, but by millions of men who have learned to access their inner sources of compassion and generativity. Is there any hope that men might learn to use their power for liberation and blessing rather than oppression and injustice? Could contemporary men find within themselves the vision and power necessary to confront the reign of monster boys on earth? Many agree with the late, great Reinhold Niebuhr that power and goodness cannot reside together in our species. Many believe men to be inherently abusive of power. We disagree. We believe that both men and women have encoded deep inside them an understanding of how to use their power for blessing and liberation. With the Navajo, we have faith that human beings can once again find the blessing way. It is much too early to say where this contemporary ferment among men will take us. Perhaps one day it will seem as silly, reactive, and shallow as its eager detractors represent it to be. We continue, however, to indulge our hopes that this will not be the case. Cynicism will never bring us the power we need to face our planetary challenges. Our hope is that more and more men will respond to the inner urge to maturity, and in so doing make themselves available to serve the world. We offer this book as an aid to those men who think with Blake that earth might be fair, that we can realize a universal brotherhood of Eden. Many of us remember the Kennedy years and our fantasies that we had of Camelot. We thrilled to JFK's admonition that we can do better. Certainly we know that politicians deceive us when they try to present themselves as the expected one. But we believe the voice these men are echoing is a real voice, resonating within each of us, and one which, if properly heeded, will begin to lead us along the blessing way. That voice, I have felt a long time, is that voice of the King archetype. When I first was studying all this stuff and trying to understand about these archetypal structures, I had no interest in King archetype at all. Since I was such a magician myself and really didn't know it, I had started by studying ritual processes in various spiritual traditions around the world. But from that I began to study the anthropology of Victor Turner and looking into this idea of this transformative space, which incidentally you're experiencing this week. But Turner had studied this transformative space, and I began to realize, well, here it is in anthropology. Who among the psychologists is looking at this kind of space? And it turned out that I became aware of the work of John Perry. John Weir, W-E-I-R, Perry. He had done a book which he had titled The Royal Father. I think the Lord of the Four Quarters, Myths of the Royal Father. And when I began to look at this, I began to see what he had done is he had accumulated all of these stories of the myths of the true king. A lot of problems that people have with even talking about king is that human kings have often manifested more the shadow side of this archetype. But when you get into looking at the myths, you get a representation and story of the human longing. And this is one of the quotes from one of the texts that he had found. This is a translation from an ancient Egyptian hymn of the 2nd millennium BCE, a hymn to the Pharaoh. Thou hast stood as king upon the unyielding land and caused it to flourish. In thy form as Ptah, the risen land, in your manifestation as the unifier, what your mouth created by speaking, what your hand shaped according to your heart, you have raised up out of the waters of chaos. And Perry, in that book, told of the feeling for the Pharaoh in those myths. And it was said of the Pharaoh that it was because of him that the young men could sleep at night. Because of him, the young men could sleep at night. There are many, so I recommend to you, I republished his book under the title Lord of the Four Quarters, The Mythology of Kingship, in the series I edited on Jungian psychology and world spirituality. Let's look at this sheet which we've passed out. I just want to do again here what we've done before. This is a diagram from this new edition, 2007 edition of The King Within. So again, I'm very impressed by the Mayan tradition. And on the front of this book is a Mayan king. We're looking down at the top of a Mayan pyramid. As you know, on the top of a Mayan pyramid, there's a place of a temple. And that's what is represented here by the space of the optimal personal self, what I call the optimal system self. So each one of these archetypes we've been talking about, you start from the bottom of this pyramid to represent lack of integration, and work your way toward more and more integration. More integration requires that the four systems, the four quarters, operate synergistically together. And let's go to the base of the pyramid on the king facet now. Whereas the warrior would be mere aggression at the lowest point, the magician mere knowledge, the lover mere embodiment. At the lowest level, the king archetype reflects mere power. And some of the evolutionary psychologists talk about those as dominance systems, grounded in your sociobiology, dominance systems. Well, the capacity to exert power manifest in immature forms is merely the intent or the capacity to dominate, mere power. But as that royal energy begins to integrate and begins to deploy, I love the word deploy about these archetypal systems, because they are present but unevoked early in childhood. And if the nurturance is there, then the potential begins to deploy. And so as this king potential begins to deploy, then comes the capacity for ordering chaos and provision of resources. And so the capacity to begin to shape an order that might reflect, when it's really matured, might more fully reflect justice. It's very interesting how these quadrants relate to classical senses of virtues. Courage is a warrior virtue. Prudence, or the capacity to think about the implications of your actions in the future, is a magician virtue. Temperance, the ability not to be undone by the pleasures you seek, is a lover virtue. But justice is a royal virtue. And so at the heart of the mythic reality of the archetype of the king is a longing to move toward a just order. In many traditions, the royal throne is directly connected with an eternal sense of the law, the right order. In Egypt it was ma'at, In Hebrew tradition, it was Torah. And in Chinese traditions, it would be seen as the Tao. And you can go on and on and on, but there's a sense of the connection with the true king, with a just intent for the cosmic order. So that begins, and so hence the concern to be able to make the land flourish so that people have food and they have plenty. So the image of abundance that is associated. You remember when the Grail came in, it's almost like a cornucopia. The sense of abundance begins to pour forth resources, provisions. As this capacity integrates in a more mature way, there is an increasing capacity for centering and calmness. Many people who meditate in a lotus position, seeking the deep true center, do not realize that they are doing in what might be seen in effect as a royal yoga, a capacity to sit in the throne at the center of the world, which is a still point amongst the four quarters of the turning world. So, if you are a man with some adequate connection to this royal center, you will not have an intense anxiety disorder. So when you see somebody with runaway anxiety, you know how alienated they are from this part of the personality. But as this capacity matures, then a moral flourishing results, and this is the capacity for inclusive caring, for inclusive caring. The cold and heartless triage. You know triage? Triage is when you're going to decide who you're going to leave out. And you're not going to care about the one that cannot clamor for what they need. This is the story in the Christian myth. The reference to the Good Shepherd. Because the story of the Good Shepherd in the Gospels is a reference to a messianic royal virtue. And that is, there may be 99 sheep already in the fold, but the Good Shepherd is aware that one is missing and will put forceful resources to work in finding that one who might be lost. So the capacity for inclusive caring is at the heart, and then flourishing with that is a strength-based power to bless. So at the flourishing of this royal capacity in the female or the male soul is the capacity to bless others and bless the world in the stewardship of the power that this person has. And you can tell when the royal sector is not matured by the absence of efforts to bless. So I need to just touch on a few of the shadow elements. The most common one, of course, you know it's shadowy if you're displacing your royal systems in projection on someone else. We've already talked about dependency disorders. So if you're giving your power away, that is course marks a dysfunctional royal sector in the personality. But we know the pathological royal more in its overt expression, in what we call, in my business as a psychoanalyst, the narcissistic personality disorder. The narcissistic personality disorder acts as if he is the center of the world and that the world exists for him. In classical stories, that kind of figure is known as the cannibal king that eats the world for himself. And so the narcissistic personality disorder, very interestingly, according to what I've already said, is not as anxious as other pathologies. They are much calmer, and they tend to attract people who are more dependent to them, like flies or like moths to a light. So you will notice, if you have an empty space in your psyche where this king development should be, you will notice that when a narcissist comes around or a sociopath comes around, your knees start to get weak and you start wanting to kneel. I'm serious. It happens all the time. That's how so many monster boys manage to rule in the world. But I am forever trying to say to therapists, do not hate these men. Do not hate them. They have access to an energy which, if they are aided in maturing and having that initiated, then they would have a great forcefulness to bring to the nurturance of the world. And so when I look at any of these quadrants and I see the dysfunction, I'm not interested in stopping there. I'm wanting to know, well, how can we help that person find a way to take that energy and mature it, regulate it, make it work for himself in a more creative way, and thereby work for others. So when this energy, this royal energy, is manifesting in a powerful but shadow form, there is no empathy. This person has no empathy, has no interest whatsoever in your needs. You exist merely as what we know in my business as a self-object extension. You are a part of me, and therefore I can do with you as I wish. And if you do not cop to that, if you do not agree to simply be an expression of me, then you're nothing to me. Then you're nothing to me. And so there's a lack of empathy. This person for whom the royal energy is present but not matured cannot love. So we have a context for the story. This energy, if I had a lot more time, I would talk about the grandiosity that I wrote about in my Facing the Dragon book. But the narcissistic personality disorder and personality systems resembling it are full of grandiose God energies, golden energies. They're full of grail energies, but they've identified with it. They think they own it. They seek to franchise it. And so, in wrapping up here, I would just say that we need to understand that a transformation can occur even in the grandiose young would-be prince, like the young Parsifal. It's very grandiose, does not realize it. But if that grandiosity can be confronted in a way that does not destroy him in the shame, if that grandiosity can be confronted and contained, it may be transformed into creativity and the capacity to care for the world. So I will stop there and open it up. I've got, I wanted to have, let's see, we got about 5 more minutes, something like that. Is that right? Okay. I wanted to emphasize that once that narcissism is transformed into maturity, then the ego no longer has to eat the world. In fact, this personality can understand what it means to make an offering which is beyond its own narcissistic needs. That is the heart of the mature person spiritually. Every mature spiritual master has the capacity to will and act in a way which transcends their own narcissistic needs. And that in traditional cultures has been identified as sacrifice. So this is why the archetype of sacrifice is at the heart of so many spiritual traditions around the world, because humans have known that the capacity to begin to make an offering beyond your own arrogance is at the heart of realized humanity. One thing a lot of us guys do, and I'll just cop to this for myself, there are a lot of guys that just cut off any of their royal and warrior stuff and just don't show it. They take refuge in the magician sort of lover sector of the psyche. I'm not saying this is you. I'm not saying this is you, but I'm just saying that instead of ever developing the ability to be in a confrontation with another person, not just women, but to be in that confrontation without being homicidal, and being in that confrontation without really making oneself suicidal by not protecting oneself. There are a lot of guys who cut the whole active aspects of the male self off in order to survive. And what they will do is what I did for many years is I would just sort of be like the Wizard of Oz, and I would just disappear into that magician. Nothing can enrage a woman more than she's trying to confront the man, trying to engage him, and he's sort of, suddenly she notices, this thing sitting here with me is not really him. This is an android. That guy put an android in here to deal with me. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. And often they could not articulate that I just said, but they think this is not a real person. And so then they'll start to escalate their attacks to see if this thing can sustain some punishment or whether they will crack and the real guy will step out. So a lot of us become opaque and we are not visible. When I did the Mankind Project weekend and I was asked to choose a name, an animal name, I chose President Lion, because in so much of my life I have been opaque and not present, not accessible behind my magician capacities. Oh, you have a problem? I don't understand. So I'm not saying that's you, but I'm saying it is possible to be so conflict averse that you don't put anything out there of your true self that might lead somebody to want to bump up against you. Yeah. And we call that, in psychoanalysis, when we handle things that way, we call it the false self system.
Are you ready to explore the fullness of the King archetype within you? Try our King Within workbook, a guide through powerful shadow work exercises and self-reflection prompts that reveal hidden aspects of your psyche. This self-help resource includes detailed journaling exercises, self-reflection guides, and instructional videos to help you create an actionable plan for transformative personal development. Start your shadow work journey today.